Hey everyone, thank you for joining me for another video. Still working things out on how best to present things to you, and in this episode we're going to do a little bit of research, pick up where I left off from a year or two ago, a little bit of repetition of a few things to keep it clear as to the times we're in. Of course, right now in the past few weeks of this new year, I'm seeing big YouTube channels picking up more in Garabandal, and a friend of mine who helps me run the Marian Apparitions Facebook page, Glenn Hudson, seems to be getting picked up everywhere from lifesitenews to called out recently in Dr. Taylor Marshall live cam, where he himself is even speaking up in Garabandal, specifically about the Pope going to Moscow. I believe there's every chance it could be Francis. I'm not gambling on it. Could be any Pope in the future that goes to Moscow. But with the amount of things happening and the time that we're in, I'm going to start laying out a little bit of revision as why it most likely or very possibly could be Francis, and then to highlight that where we're at. So from between Dr. Taylor Marshall, your countdown to the Kingdom guys, Mark Mallet and Professor Daniel Oconnor, not to mention a few others, I really are glad to see that people are starting to pick up Garabandal, to see the times that we're in. But like me, I don't just focus on that one. For me, the jigsaw of it all has always been Fatima, Garabandal, Akita, Japan, and Medjugorje, where the climax, the conclusion is coming, and we're getting into this era of peace. We're going to research back to why Francis might be the one going to Moscow, why we're in the new era now, and how it's linked with the continuation of theme throughout these four major Marian apparitions and prophecies associated with them. So let's get started. Okay, I've done this one before in a different format, so I'm just done a little revision. I've added Akita in, but let's go back. Fatima is the absolute pillar of it all. It's where it really all began, with this battle between Our Lady, Heaven, and the one between Hell and Satan, and all that's to come. You're going to see some quotes why it goes back to scripture, why it goes back to the book of Revelation particularly, and where everyone from Lucia of Fatima right through all these visionaries and these apparition sites right to the current present day, why it's all focused on now. But as we know quickly, here on the left with Pope Leo XIII, he had his mystical experience, and from memory serves me right, it was 1884, and where he realised that the 20th century was going to be the century of this decisive battle between heaven and hell. It's also where we get the St. Michael prayer because of that. And what shortly happened into the 20th century, we had World War I, we have Fatima apparitions beginning in 1917, where Our Lady appeared to the visionary, the little children. Lucia was the surviving visionary, dying only up in, I think it was 2005, a couple of months before Pope John Paul II himself. Now, moving on from Fatima, remember this, all these videos are in quick succession on the playlist, which I'll share a link for in the video if I remember, in depth for each one, but here we're putting it all together, because I still find that some people, and I could be wrong, but for 20 years I can't seem to let this go. It's too easy. It's more easier than ever to see how it's fitting. Russia, from Fatima, as we see there in the line from 1917, Russia is right through till now, which is no surprise when we see what's happening in the news the past year. But throughout, from Fatima this past century, we had Garabandal in the 1960s, we then had the Akita apparitions in 1973, and then for me I'm adding in Medjugorje. Now before some people turn that off, as I see in the comments, still some just don't seem to think that the massive amount of fruits of Medjugorje point to heaven. Some still say it's demonic, and you're entitled to your opinion, but please make it rational and back it up as to why. For I can certainly give plenty as why Medjugorje fits in this jigsaw, why it is the absolute ultimate conclusion of this whole thing, what she began in Fatima, and that has been repeated many times throughout the years since 1981 when Medjugorje apparitions began. More recently, this January, the first message of the new era of this new year. It speaks very bluntly of the times we're in. Now, what am I speaking about with the new era? Well, we have to go back to Garabandal here in the 1960s. During the time of the 1960s, we know we got the time of the Vatican II Council. We had John the 23rd, Pope John the 23rd, opening it up. Now, the Garabandal visionaries spoke about the fact that there would be 4 more popes after John the 23rd. And we've had those 4 popes. We had Pope Paul VI, John Paul II, and Benedict XVI. Now, there is a reason why his name's highlighted, and we're coming to that later. Benedict XVI did know everything of Fatima, Garabandal, Akita, and Medjugorje, and we'll see that in a little bit later. But the big thing everyone's speaking about right now, for some reason, these last few weeks, is about whether or not Pope Francis would be the Pope in the Garabandal Prophecy that goes to Moscow. Garabandal back then in the 1960s, after those 4 popes were in the new era. So with the death of Benedict XVI and the timely way that it did, it's certainly pointing to that way that we're in the new era. No doubt about it, if we're going with Garabandal. The new era has begun, and Francis is the Pope. And with all other things in context that's happening between Russia, what's going on in the church, he may very be the Pope on the way to Moscow. Now, of course, Garabandal goes on about the tribulation, warning, and great miracle. Again, all this is in great detail with the Garabandal videos, and specifically a great detail and well-researched videos is the connections of Fatima and Garabandal in the videos that I have, so please check that out. Now, the key thing with this running through is communism, as we see there next to, between the 4 popes and the picture of John Paul. Communism, and we're talking about communism now coming into the future, not something to do with the past based on what Our Lady warned at Fatima. We're talking about a re-emergence of communism, and I'm getting into that in just a few moments. But if we can move on to the next slides to keep me going with the commentary then, a little research again, up the top left there, list of St. Malachy of all the popes. That's why we're down at Francis. Is he Petrus Romanus, the last numbered pope on that list? And Catherine Emmerich I've covered before with the prophesied time of the 2 popes. And yes, there's been 2 popes in the past as well. I know Dr. Taylor Marshall highlighted that in a video, I think maybe last year, the year before. But we have had a time where some prophecies can do a 4-fold effect. They can come back round again. And sure enough, coincidentally, it came at the time where it was Benedict XVI and Francis at the end of St. Malachy's list. At the time also where we're ready to get into the new era with all else that's happening. I find that very much of a standout thing. We've already covered the 4 popes where we're into the new era with Francis. That's crystal clear. And then, of course, for the future points, if he does go to Moscow and shortly returns, we'll see a few quotes of what that means. Is it going to pertain still back to the Fatima vision where the city was half in ruins, the Pope with halting step? Is Francis the one to be martyred? Are these things still going to happen? And of course, communism is the key ingredient to it all. Now, I've got a couple of books here. The first one is Our Lady of Fatima, Prophecies of Tragedy and Hope. It's a very old looking book, I think back in the 1990s. And another one I got while I was in Garabandal is the concise version of it all. And I've done a couple of snaps on the phone using the Notes app and put them onto the computer here. I want to specifically highlight the one here in the top left, the Garabandal source. What is it about this communism that's to come back? The Blessed Virgin explained to us that this great tribulation, which was not even the chastisement, would come because a time would arrive when the church would appear to be on the point of perishing. It would pass through a terrible trial. We asked the Virgin what this great trial was called, and she told us it was communism. But isn't communism dead? At least Russian communism, since much of Asia is still red. Remember, this is the 1960s. Not according to Garabandal, since Conchita told German businessman Albrecht Weber in 1965 that communism will return. Russia will make one last all-out attempt at world domination. Are we warming up to that just yet? Here is more from Mariololi, who was interviewed by Father Francis Benac of Society of the Jesuits in 1978. Our Lady spoke several times about communism. I don't remember how many times, but she said that a time would come when it would seem that communism had mastered or engulfed the whole world. Now, for me, that ain't just Russia. That's the Great Reset. That's the World Economic Forum, but we'll get to that. Continuing on, I think it was then that she told us that priests would have difficulty saying Mass and talking about God and divine things. Our Lady said that priests would have to go into hiding, but I didn't see whether they were being killed or not. She didn't exactly say that they would be killed, but I'm sure they would be martyred. How extensive will the persecution be? Europe will be especially hard hit, but Loli said she thought it would go beyond that. Conchita's aunt Antonia testified to having heard the visionary say in ecstasy that if we don't amend our ways, Russia will take possession of the whole world. It goes on there a little bit more where we go on, but let's get to the next slide to keep the narrative running. Glenn Hudson himself sent me this, I think a couple of years ago maybe. Obviously we've got his name and the date down there, but this is from the file on the Facebook page. Now, concerning the Pope going to Russia, we get from Albrecht Weber's book, The Finger of God, which contains a statement attributed to Conchita, quote, "The Pope will go to Russia, to Moscow. As soon as he returns to the Vatican, hostilities will break out in different parts of Europe." Now, if Francis is the Pope to go to Moscow, it's fit and timely to bring about a sense of calm and peace for all that's still building up with Ukraine. We're seeing in the Akita prophecies of cardinals against cardinals, bishops against bishops, it's becoming more and more clear with everyone, even those that are not into looking at for signs of the times or aware of all this contained in these apparitions or the prophecies. There's just a sense of constant target and obsession of traditional Latin Mass, a target and an obsession, almost like cancel culture has infested the church, and if any priest that rocks the boat by giving orthodox teaching, they're cancelled. Is this it starting to simmer? We're starting to see it before it boils over. I believe all these things are focusing, and it brings the argument to the fact that we're in the times where the Pope may as well go, should have every opportunity to be going to Moscow. But continuing on the certain part, author Tom Fahey confirmed to me that when he interviewed Weber in 2006 for research for his book, Suddenly and Unexpectedly, he told him that when the Pope returns from Moscow, there would be a revolution at the Vatican from the advance of communism. There's that word again, future communism, the times that we're seeing simmering up now, rising up. Your father Chad Ripperger speaks about it. I've said this already, but more people are starting to see this theme. Now here's another quote I've done before in the Fatima Garabandal ones. Now we've seen the few sources regarding communism from Garabandal. Let's see what Lucia of Fatima also says about the future concerning communism, and this was in 1946. According to Professor Thomas Walsh, Sister Lucia made it plain that Her Lady did not ask for the consecration of the world to her Immaculate Heart. What she demanded specifically was the consecration of Russia. Sister Lucia stated more than once, and with deliberate emphasis, what Our Lady wants is that the Pope and all the bishops in the world shall consecrate Russia to her Immaculate Heart on one special day. If this is done, she will convert Russia and there will be peace. If it is not done, the errors of Russia will spread through every country in the world. Does this mean, in your opinion, that every country without exception will be overcome by communism? Yes, says Lucia. And I still believe that could come. I don't believe Russia invading Europe is Russia spreading communism. I think there's a parallel with what is happening right now with Russia, Ukraine, and what that future may entail between the NATO countries and what future oblivion might be with war. But when you look at everything that's happening from the West in these last few years, it's very much the case that those errors have infected the West long ago, and it's starting to mutate, it's starting to show the illness of society in the West, and it is absolutely covered with communism. Continuing on from the book already mentioned, on another page here, 76 and 77. Writing to the same priest on May 18th, 1936, Sister Lucia explained about the other question as to whether or not it would be appropriate to insist in order to obtain the consecration of Russia. My reply is almost the same as my previous ones. I regret it has not been done yet, but the same God who requested it is the one who has so permitted this. Whether it is appropriate to insist or not, I do not know. It seems to me that if the Holy Father did it right now, God would accept it and would fulfill his promise, and, in so doing, the Holy Father would no doubt gladden our Lord and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. I have spoken to our Lord inwardly about the subject, and not too long ago I asked him why he would not convert Russia without the Holy Father making the consecration. Now this is the main point I want to highlight, because I want my whole church to acknowledge that consecration is a triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, so as to subsequently extend the devotion to it and place it alongside the devotion to my Sacred Heart. But, my God, the Holy Father will not believe me unless you move him with a special inspiration. The Holy Father, pray very much for the Holy Father. He will do it, but it will be late. Nevertheless, the Immaculate Heart of Mary will save Russia, which has been entrusted to it. Now I'm going to speak off the cuff, as we say here, with this, what it's reminding me of. As we see in the photo here, we have Lucia speaking with Pope John Paul II. He was the Pope shot May 13th, 1981, which was the anniversary of Fatima, the first apparition of May 13th, 1917. So 6 or several weeks or whatever it was, you think of May 13th when he was shot, 1981. After much prayers, he admitted to Marian in her book that shortly after his prayers on his recovery, he was notified of apparitions in Medjugorje. And I would really recommend you read Mariana's book of her encounter in private audience with Pope John Paul II, plus many other things she writes about. He was a very great believer in Medjugorje, and I believe he was the one to believe in the ones I'm highlighting here as well. Now, before digressing too much, the things that stand out for me here, 1960, Lucia speaks about, again, that decade, going all the way from Anne Catherine Emmerich, and further back to Quito, Ecuador with Our Lady of Good Success, always pointing to the middle of the 20th century or shortly thereafter, the 1960s. There's something that goes on there, and big in the church we know was Vatican II Council, and look where it's went from there to now. Where's the faith? Where's the new evangelization? Where's the growth? Instead, we're getting exactly what these apparitions are speaking about: division, apostasy, signs of the times and everything it contains. There's something not going according to plan since the 1960s. Now, when it's too late, the Holy Father, he'll do it, but it'll be too late. Now, I don't necessarily believe it's John Paul II. I think grace came from it, and yes, there's this division, it was done, it wasn't done. But I'm leaning more towards the fact that it probably wasn't. Or maybe it was because it was too late. But is Russia converted? Have they stopped all their errors? The first country to legalise abortion, the communism that came with everything in that, and what we see in the West now. We've covered that in other videos. Women's rights, gay rights, all this came through Lenin Marxism, and now we're seeing it in the West. And I see Russia U-turning in so many principles, but not all of them. But they're still not in fold with the church. They've still not had the new rise of Christianity, and I think that's what will happen through the great signs. But then again, Russia's invaded Ukraine because of the fact that we're getting to this climax. So where's that consecration all these decades later? But of course, John Paul II also didn't say Russia at his consecration. It was the world for diplomatic reasons. But then when Russia invades Ukraine last year, Francis does Ukraine and Russia. And if you look at historic Russia and how it began, it actually stems from the Kiev region going east. So for me, that was covered for both. That was more specific. But it doesn't matter with the argument if it's done or not. Here's our Lucia in her memoirs basically saying it'd be too late. But there's hope. Nevertheless, the Immaculate Heart of Mary will save Russia, which has been entrusted to it. So forget the argument whether it was done or whether it wasn't done regarding the consecration. There is an entrustment given to Our Lady, and this is where she's coming to save the day. But has she left us on her own all these years? I don't believe so. I think that's why she's in Medjugorje, to walk with us, to see it through. Now here's the man I want to highlight for a little bit as we lead in for the new era. Pray for me that I may not flee Rome for fear of the wolves. Why would Pope Benedict say that at his inauguration mass? And another quote here as well. Everyone takes it to Anne Catherine Emmerich about the wolves and her visions at the time of the two popes and the Pope in an unknown place where of his residency, which all focused with Benedict in these times. But the most evident mark, this is St. John Eudes' quote, the most evident mark of God's anger and the most terrible castigation, chastisement, he can inflict upon the world are manifested when he permits his people to fall into the hands of clerics who are priests more in name than deed, priests who practice the cruelty of ravening wolves rather than the charity and affection of devoted shepherds. Now it goes on a bit more, but this is not exactly what we're seeing. This division in the church, this poison that's growing up, the more world in the church, the apostasy rising, the division is crystal clear than ever before. And every time during his papacy, whether it was sexual abuse crisis, whether it was something else happening, it always went back to the point, it's in Fatima, it goes back to Fatima. Well, why Fatima? Why? He investigated every one of these apparition sites. What is it he knows? He's very much aware of the times. Now here's something I've highlighted before as well. 2013, on the 11th of February, Benedict announced his resignation. A few days later, on the 15th of February, the meteor lands in Russia. The 13th of March, Pope Francis is elected, and on the 18th of March, Putin is re-elected. And then on the 21st of April, we have another meteor landing in Argentina. Now, even Dr. Taylor Marshall has recently highlighted the lightning strike in the Vatican in St. Peter's Dome the evening Benedict has announced his resignation on 11th of February. But no one else seems to be highlighting the other apocalyptic signs. And when you look at the chances of it happening so close to these events, the fact it's the time of the two popes, the fact it's the end of the Malachi list, we're ready to get into the new era. And it's all about Russia again. And this is where it happens. In Argentina, the home of the new pontiff. Come on, it's a bit obvious, is it not? But also with Ratzinger becoming Pope Benedict XVI, here's a quote he says in 1984, on November 11th. He affirmed that the third secret of Fatima concerns a radical call for conversion, the absolute importance of history, the dangers threatening the faith and the life of the Christian, and therefore of the world. And then the importance of the Novicini, the last events at the end of time. But the things contained in the third secret of Fatima correspond to what has been announced in Scripture and are confirmed by many other apparitions. Now, Lucia of Fatima says, you want to know everything of it? Read the book of Revelation, chapters 8 through 12, I believe it is. It's all about the war between the dragon and St. Michael. It goes back to Pope Leo XIII. Look at the rest of the century. Confirmed by many other Marian apparitions. Now, on the top right there, that's Father Joseph Ratzinger meeting with the priest in Medjugorje. We've got Vasula Ryden, True Life in God, standing next to him there. He led the commission into the investigation of Akita, which confirmed that it was directly related to Fatima. And in 1992, I think it was, 93, it's highlighted an unstoppable waterfall, great Garabandal documentary, clears up so many spoofs and things that's circling about. It clears it all up, highlights everything about the fact that he's gave it a clear slate and it stands fine with the church. It's not been approved, but it's not been reputed or anything like that. It's in good standing. He's aware of all this before he even became Pope. He's aware of all of them. And it goes back to those quotes. It goes back to the fact that the Wolsey knows of the state of the church. Quarter of a century ahead of the CDF, seeing all the sorts of what's happened in it, all the poison, the sewage of the church. The man knew exactly what he was stepping up for and what he had to step back for. So this brings us to where we're at then, the new era. It begins with Francis. The 4 popes of Garabandal predicted in the 1960s have come to pass, and I believe it's with the death, the timely death of Pope Benedict XVI on the last day of 2022, and as the clock struck into the new year of 2023, we now enter the 50th year of Akita and all the warnings that that contains. And the new message of the new era, coming first from Medjugorje, makes it clear, as I've repeated in my recent video. That Pope with halting step, we already see that with Francis. He doesn't need to be injured in the future to see how he walks just now. In fact, he's even in a wheelchair quite a lot more. We're seeing a church divided, which is increasingly becoming more obvious and evident. We're seeing Russia back at war. And all these focus on the point that Francis may be the Pope to go to Moscow. And whether it's him or his successor, whoever, when we see the Pope going to Moscow, we have to be more alert than ever. We have to be strong in our faith. And that's why I believe one answer for Medjugorje, why all this time, is it real, is it not? The fact is that you can get prepared for a month or 6 months and then that's that. Or if the mother of Jesus is your mother every day, courting you on with little messages a month, every month, so as to say, and you can see that progression in the visionary's life and the village life. What she started off gently, for like 40 odd years later, it's now manifested in the point where they're living heaven and earth. And I urge everyone, if you can, to go to experience it. I've been to Fatima, I've been to Garabandal, I've been to Lourdes, and I've been to Medjugorje a few times. And I love every one of them. Fatima was always my first love. And when I see these 4 together, it's very clear that what she began in Fatima, she is going to finish in Medjugorje. We're talking about the time of triumph. But before that triumph comes in the form of events contained in the secrets, all that she's warned us about in these other apparitions leading up to this time is going to manifest more. And that's where the communism spreading throughout the world. For me, it's the World Economic Forum. And here's just a few quotes of what they've actually been saying in January 2023. Repeated things, same theme. It's going to be a controlled society with climate change pushing the agenda, with more fear getting put into us to go along and herd it like animals, digital IDs, carbon footprints. You can't do anything without them known. And this is engulfing the world into a controlled society with haves and have-nots. And this is the final ultimate battle. So stay alert, people. Whether it's Francis or his successor, the stage is set, the door is open. The Holy See is in better diplomatic relations than ever before with Russia, apparently. There's every opportunity for him to go since the Vatican's hosted Vladimir Putin several times. But the man of peace, the message of peace is probably more needed than ever between Russia and the rest of the world as things keep going along the way it is. So take from that what you want. For me, it's very clear, and I would love to discuss it with other people. You know, I really liked what Professor Daniel Oconnor did just this week. I've says this decade's going to reveal a lot. In his recent video with Father Gobby, who I'm aware of, with the Marian movement of priests, he seems to have fitted a little bit in that I may have needed to focus more as why this decade is. So bravo to Father Professor O'Connor in that recent video. Dr. Taylor Marshall, I believe a door has been opened as he's looking into Garabandal, but don't be afraid to walk through that door and look at Medjugorje. I beg you, it's all there. And I'm open for anyone to suggest who you would like to invite onto this channel for me to speak with them, to interview them. Just good Catholic people sharing our faith, preparing for these times as best we can, and above all, to help heaven, to help Our Lady get the message out there, to live the gospel. So feel free to share the video. Please share it everywhere you can to get it out there, and all the other playlists that I'm putting in for that light bulb effect to click, and for something for me to learn and the feedback with the community as well. How about the thumbs up, like, subscribe, share, you know what to do, and let's start getting this out there while we've got the times. But look at the times we're in, people. You know, a priest once says on a homily, everyone's worried about all this thing. He says it's the greatest time to be alive, the work to be done, the labourers in the vineyard. You know, the time of the apostles, the greatest saints, they would want to be alive now. And here we are, we deliberately made in love by God to live in these times. It is no doubt for a specific reason, and what better way is to get the message out there. So let's do it together. Till next time, take care. God bless.